All right, good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. 8:40 right on the nose here, and we are tonight learning Maseches Eruvin Daf Zayin, a relatively short daf. As you can see, the Amud Beis is pretty short. The contents of this daf are not complicated, no magnetiles as we did yesterday. Really pretty straightforward. And we're starting on the bottom of Amud Beis, approximately 10 lines up, 4 lines before the Gemara gets to its widest lines. And the Gemara opens with a conversation that we started with yesterday about a mavui akum, about a mavui that takes a right degree, or whatever, it takes a turn in the middle of the mavui. So the walking place, the semi-public walking place, is like L-shaped. And we spoke about that yesterday in regards to a machlokes of Rav and Shmuel. And Rav held like the Tanna Kama, that you would have to put up a tzuras HaPesach, and Shmuel was of the opinion that you needed delasos, that you needed to have doors in order to make sure that that it was considered a kosher place to carry. Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, as we briefly spoke about yesterday. And that's our starting point for today. Again, 10 or so lines, a little bit more from the bottom, 4 lines before the Gemara gets wide above the base. Says the Gemara as follows. Hahu mavui akum dehaba ben Naharda. There was this L-shaped mavui in Naharda. Ramu alei chumrei de Rav chumrei de Shmuel v'atrachuhu de lasos, and they obligated in the Harda, they paskin that it had the chumras of both Rav and Shmuel. Rav, in that Rav held that there needed to be a tzuras HaPesach where it bent, where the L shape took place, and Shmuel was of the opinion that it even needed doors. Chumrei de Rav de Amar Toraso kimafulash. Rav, as we know yesterday, said that it's considered mafulash, but it needs a tzuras HaPesach. I v'Amar Rav halacha ketana kama. That's correct. We did say that halacha is like Tanna Kama. So where do we see the chumra of Shmuel? Kishmuel damar halacha kechananya. Amar Shmuel Toraso kesasum. So how are all of the shitas playing out here? Because we know that we already learned yesterday that Rab held that the halacha is like the Tanna Kama, and Shmuel was of the opinion that the halacha is like Hananya. So it says the Gemara, Kerab, Amar Toraso Kimufulash, and basically the way that we understand this Gemara is that according to Rab, this mavui akum, this L-shaped mavui, would have the features of a tzuras HaPesach. That's chumrah number 1, is that we'd follow Rav, and chumrah number 2 is we'd also follow Shmuel, which is that we'd require doors. And that is how the Gemara explains this mavui that was in Naharda, that they paskin the chumrah both like Rav and like Shmuel. And the Gemara has a very hard time with this because of the following. The Gemara says, Umi avdinan kitrei chumrei. You're allowed to just be doubly machmir. You can take Rav's chumrah and Shmuel's chumrah. That doesn't make any sense because v'hatanya. This is a well-known brisa about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, a great mari makom to have in your pocket for when you have conversations with people about the nature of machlokes. And here's what the brisa says: 6 lines from the bottom, Davav Amud Beis, questioning our assumption that this mavui akum could have the chumras of Rab and of Shmuel, both at tzuras HaPesach and Dor. Says the Gemara, not so fast. We're not allowed to do that because, says the brisa, b'hatanya, l'olam halacha kebeis Hillel. Really, we know that we paskin like Beis Hillel. This is already in the times of the brisa that we knew that was the case. Says the Gemara, v'harotze lasos kedivrei Beis Shammai oseh. But one who wants to keep the halachos like Beis Shammai, they're allowed to. The Gemara is going to question this. You can't. Those two things don't make sense. Says the Gemara, kedivrei Beis Hillel oseh. And if you want to follow Beis Hillel, you can do that as well. Mikule Beis Shammai umikule Beis Hillel. If you wanted to be lenient for both shitas of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, that just makes you're just shopping for a heter. That's a rasha. A person who shops for heterim is not given a wonderful accolade. We don't look for heterim necessarily. There are circumstances where poskim will lean towards a kula, but b'derech klal, we don't do that. B'derech klal, what we try to do is find one posek and keep that posek. Michumre Beis Shammai, michumre Beis Hillel. What about a person who takes all the chumras of everybody? I'm always going to be the machmir. So then there says the Gemara, Olav akasuv omer haksil b'choshech holech. The person who's always machmir, that's also not healthy. If you take all the kulas, you're a rasha. If you take all the chumras, so then you're a ksil, you're a fool. So that's our case. We said that in this akum, in the mavui akum, in the harda, that we have the chumras of Rav and Shmuel. Why is it not like this brisa that you're a ksil? That's the Gemara's question right here. It says the Gemara, and the brisa continues, Elo, what is the appropriate path? Ike Beis Shammai, if you really talk a hold like Beis Shammai, then kikulehon ukechumrehon, then you should follow their leniencies and their stringencies. Ike Beis Hillel, and if you're going to follow the shitas of Beis Hillel, then kikulehon ukechumrehon, then you should follow their shitas. But you shouldn't be wishy-washy. You shouldn't be taking pieces from each posek. Certainly not both Lakula, because you're a Rasha, not both Lachumra, that makes you a Ksil. So the Gemara is trying to push back on our Gemara. How could it be that for the Mavui Akum and Naharda, that you follow the opinions Lachumra of both Rav and Shmuel? This Brisa says that it's that you're a Ksil for doing such a thing. So then says the Gemara, before we answer our question about Rav and Shmuel, we have an internal problem with this Brisa. Says the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom, Hagufa Kashya. There's a question that's built within this. What's the question that's built within this Brisa? Amris, you said, Le'olam halacha kebeis Hillel. The first thing you said is that we paskin like Beis Hillel. V'hadar Amris harotz elasos k'divrei Beis Shammai oseh. And then a line later, the next words, you say, you don't have to follow Beis Hillel. You're allowed to do whatever you want. You can just follow Beis Shammai. That's a contradiction that needs answering. And the Gemara here will present 3 different answers to this internal question within this Brisa. Again, not yet dealing with our question about how we can paskin like the Chumras of Rav and Shmuel, but rather answering only internally, how do we navigate this Brisa, which seems to be internally contradicting, where it says that first we follow like Beis Hillel, and then says if you want to follow like Beis Shammai, you're allowed. That doesn't make any sense. First answer the Gemara answers is as follows. Lo kasha, kan kodem baskol, kan la'achar baskol. There was a time in history where there was a baskol that says that we follow Beis Hillel. And according to the Shita that says that you're allowed to follow Beis Shammai, that must have been kodem baskol. That must have been before there was this public dictum from Shamayim that we are allowed to that we're no longer allowed to follow Beis Shammai, we have to follow Beis Hillel. But that's where the 2 lines were penned. The first line that says that halacha is like Beis Hillel was after the baskol, and the line that says that if you want to follow like Beis Shammai, you can was before the baskol. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2, v'i ba'isema, last line of Avim Beis, v'i ba'isema, have halachar baskol. No, really, we're all after the point in time of the baskol where the halacha is clearly like Beis Hillel. Why then does our Brisa say here on the bottom of Vavim Beis that one is allowed to paskin like Beis Shammai? What the Gemara here answers because Rabbi Yoshua he top of Zayin Amud Aleph delo mishkach. It's really de'amar. Rabbi Yoshua he de'amar delo mishkach bevaskol. We don't listen to baskol. Torah lo b'shamayim he. We do not look at a baskol to paskin, and therefore, even though it's true that within one brisa it says we paskin like Beis Shammai, we paskin like Beis Hillel, but you're allowed to be like Beis Shammai. That makes sense within the world of Rabbi Yoshua, even after the baskol was clearly there. And the shita that says that you're allowed to follow Beis Shammai is within the realm of Rabbi Yoshua, who does not pay attention to a baskol. A third answer. Hachi ka'amar. Really, we misunderstood the brisa a little bit, and here is pshat in the brisa. Kol heicha de mishkachas trei tanoe v'trei amorai de pligi ahadade kein machlokes Beis Shammai u'Beis Hillel. Whenever we have either 2 tanoim or 2 amoraim that are arguing, like we have between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, lo le'aved ki kule demar v'chi kule demar. You should not take the leniencies of both. V'lo ki chumrei demar v'chi chumrei demar. Nor should you follow the stringencies of both. Ella, o ki kule demar u'ki chumrei avid. You should follow one person's leniencies and their stringencies. O ki kule demar u'ki chumrei avid. Or you should follow the leniencies and stringencies within any one person. But again, no shopping. That's how the Gemara re-understands this brisa. That doesn't fit very nicely into the words here. It's not so simple, but it is an explanation in the Gemara, which we would basically have to reword some of this brisa. Nevertheless, that was only the internal question. The reason why the Gemara started with this story with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is because we have the story about the Mavui Akum in Nahar Da'a, where we followed the Chumras of Rav and the Chumras of Shmuel. So it says the Gemara, Mikol Makom Kasha, however you explain this brisa with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, doesn't solve the problem for me, because we still see in our brisa that we're following the Chumras of Rav and the Chumras of Shmuel. That's a ksil. You're not allowed to follow Chumras of 2 shitas. That's not allowed. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, no, really, Kule Kirav Abduha. Really, everything is like Rav. How could you say everything is like Rav? It says Chumra de Rav and Chumra de Shmuel. Answers the Gemara, the Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, Halacha, the Ein Morin Kain. That really, deep down, Rav agrees that the Shita is like the Tanakama. That's really what he believes. However, Ve'ein Morin Kain, we don't teach like the Tanakama. We only teach like the Shita of Shmuel. Take a look at Rashi, a couple of inches above where we are. Really, it says Halacha, Yibra Hamaschel Halacha Ketanakama, Ve'ein Morin Kain, Ela Kechananya Debae Delasos. So really what we're saying is that even Rav would agree to the more Machmir Shita that the Mavui Akum should have Delasos, should have doors. I asks the Gemara, back in the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, Rav Ada bar Ahava, Amar Rav, Amar Halacha, Umorin Kain. But according to Rav Ada bar Ahava, he says, no, Rav did paskin that way, like his own self. So then we're back to our question, which is you have Rav and Shmuel, Tzuras HaPesach in the Mavo Yaakov, and Zlasos in the Mavo Yaakov. We're back to where we started. Ma'ikol Meimar answers the Gemara. Amar of Shezvi, Ki lo avdinon kechumre de beitre hecha de sasre ahadade. When do we say you're not allowed to follow two chumras? That and therefore you're a ksil, like we saw in the Brisa. That's when the two shitas are head to head, when they can't coexist. When you have shitas that can't coexist with one another, then you're not allowed. Then you're not allowed to hold like both shitas. It's a metzias. It's not just a hashkafa. It's not possible. But here it's possible to hold both Rav and Shmuel. Okay, you have a tzuras haPesach, but you also have delasos. You also have doors. So because those two answers are not sos or nahadade, says Rav Shezvi, so therefore the case of Rav and Shmuel is not a case of ksil. They're not violating the rules of chumras. At the end of the day, because both of them are viable shitas, they can coexist, the chumrah of Rav and the chumrah of Shmuel. Therefore, says Rav Shezvi, it's not a problem. Where do we learn this from? Kigon shidra v'gulgoles. This is true about a spine and about a skull. As we know, kohanim are not allowed to become tamei. And we know that there's tumas maga, tumas masa, and tumas ohel. But it's not true of every single part of every single body. For example, let's say the skull or the spine were missing some pieces. So it may well be that the halacha is that there is no tumas ohel in such a case. How does it play out here? 1/3 of the way down to Zayin Amud Aleph says the Gemara, it's not. Hashidra v'hagulgalas shechasru. If you have a spine, obviously a skeleton, you have a spine and a skull, and they're missing pieces. The kama chesron, how much has to be missing for it to lose its capacity to generate tumas mace for the kohen? How much has to be missing to make it mutter for the Kohen to be under the same tree as that skeleton? Answers the Gemara, Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. This shidra, in regards to the spine, Beis Shammai omrim shtei chulios, it's two vertebrae. Uveis Hillel omrim chulia achas. Beis Hillel says it's even only one vertebra. That's a more lenient opinion. We allow the Kohen to be in that space, even though only one of the many vertebrae are missing. What about the skull? Beis Shammai omrim kimolo mekadeach. It's like the size of a drill bit, or whatever they would use to poke a hole. Uveis Hillel omrim no kedei sheinatel ninachai v'yamos. Had it a different amount, had it been that the person was alive and you removed whatever amount it was that would kill him, so then that would be the shear where it's no longer considered matame machlokas Beis Shammai, both by shedra and by gulgalas. And here's what the Gemara says. We have the same exact machlokas in regards to the two of them. Aval, and here's the critical part for us. But where these two things are not problematic of Dina, then we're allowed to make the two things coexist. You can't make the same shear of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel coexist. Is the Kohen tamei if he's under a tree where there's only one vertebrae missing, yes or no? That is a machlokes in psak, according to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Those two things cannot coexist. So then we say that the two can't coexist, and then we say, but where they are not able to coexist, and of course they can't, but where they are able to coexist, like by Rav and Shmuel, where you can have both the tzuras haPesach in the mavui akum, right by the L shape of the mavui. You can have the tzuras haPesach in the middle there, and you can also have the telaso. So then we would say of dinon that it's considered permissible, and you're not in violation of the rules of the brayso we learned on Vav Amud Beis to say that you're a ksil. Says the Gemara, vehechi the sasrei ahadade lo avdina. It's not so true. I'm going to give you an example right now, says the Gemara, where we see the two shitas do not agree with one another categorically. They are in violation in theory, not in violation. They can't coexist, as we'll see. And yet we see that it was done. Says the Gemara, halfway down Masiv Rav Mesharshia, Ma'aseh Rebbe Akiva shaliket esrog be'echad b'shvat. As we may well know, there is Rosh Hashanah le'ilanos. And the beginning of that new year of fruits and vegetables has a nafkamina in a Shemitah year in regards to what type of tithing we would do in that year. And he collected a fruit on Aleph Shvat. The Nohag bo Beis Isurin, with an ayin and with a sin, not isurin like iser, like forbidden, but isurin from meiser. He was knowing two different kinds of isurin. Take a look at Rashi below us, about 2 inches below where we are, 3 inches below, Dibur Hamaskal, Shnei Isurin. Shnia Yotza, the second year of Shemitah went out. Ushlishis nichneses, and the third year went in, and there are different types of meiser that are brought in those 2 years. Back in the Gemara, the Nagubo Beis Yisur and Echad Kedire Beis Shammai, Echad Kedire Beis Hillel. But those two things don't coexist. The timing of when the new year changes over is either Aleph Shvat or Tesvav Shvat. So Rosh Hashanah Leilanos is not the same. They can't coexist. You're being machmir in a way that doesn't make sense because one of the meisers that you're doing belongs to a different year. Nevertheless, we see the Rabbi Akiva did it. So says the Gemara, no, that's different. That wasn't because Rabbi Akiva was being machmir. That's because Rabbi Akiva didn't know what the answer was. Rabbi Akiva, gamre, his mesora, istapekle. He wasn't sure what the din was. He didn't know what Beis Hillel held. So he was being machmir within Beis Hillel because of a lack of yediyas, because he didn't know what the answer was, but not because he believes that you're allowed to say that when two things can't coexist, that you're supposed to do that. He didn't know what to do. So he was mesuppak. So he did what he did the best that he could with what he had, which is that he treated as if there were 2 Rosh Hashanahs for Ilanos, one on Aleph Shvat and one on Tesvav. He didn't know what to do, so he treated it l'chumrah in both cases. So that's what the Gemara answers here. Ve'avad hacha l'chumrah v'hacha l'chumrah. Period. That brings us to the 2 dots. So B'kitzur, what we've learned up until now is that the only time we have a limitation of being doubly machmir for 2 shitas is when the 2 shitas can't coexist. But when they can coexist, under the appropriate circumstances, we should be machmir. As a general rule, I've shared this before, and I hope to share it many times again. When it comes to the whole world of chumras, just one yesod to think of. It's a hashkafa. It's not a halacha, but it's a way to look at chumras. And I heard this quoted in the name of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. One who is interested in taking on chumras should make sure of the following. Before you take on any chumras that impact other Jews, other family members, you should take on every chumrah that's bein adam l'chavero. No chumras bein adam l'makom until you've taken on every chumrah bein adam l'chavero. Because if you want to be makbid on something that your family's, let's say out of the blue, I decided that I want to be makbid on Chalav Yisrael. Well, that may be a tircha for a lot of different people. So if it's going to be a tircha for a lot of different people, so then what are you supposed to do? That's not nice. That's not nice. If I want to do it for myself, that's fine. The simcha, no problem at all. So that's what the Gemara says in regards to chumras here, is that you're allowed to have chumras that are lakanu lakan as long as they're not sosra nahadade. Then says the Gemara by the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down, Dav Zayin Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Yosef, Rav Yosef, Kamei de Rav Huna v'Yosef, the Ka'amar, Rav Yosef. Important to hold cup with the names here. Rav Yosef was teaching something in front of Rav Huna. Rav Yosef was talking. The Ka'amar, and he's quoting, who's he quoting? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So Rav Yosef is quoting Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda, as we know, learned both under Rav and under Shmuel, a rare privilege to learn under 2 of the greatest of the Tanaim of the earliest generations. Rav Yehuda was a 2nd generation Amora Rav, and Shmuel were of the 1st, and he had the privilege of learning from these 2 tremendous Tanaim. Okay, what does he quote from Rav Yehuda Amar Rav? A simple din. Remember, yesterday we were learning about where is it permissible to have an eruv, and we were discussing a case where there was a mavui, and on each end of the mavui there was a reshus harabim. So it says the Gemara as follows: machlokes visrat yomikan usrat yomikan upalt yomikan upalt yomikan. When is it that we have our conversation about a mavui and how to make the eruv, like we discussed yesterday, Chananya or the Tanakama, Tzuras HaPesach on one side and Lechi V'Korah on another, or do we need Zelasos according to Chananya within Beis Shammai? So there, the Gemara says, whatever it says over there according to those shitas. But here the Gemara says that on each end of the Mavui, there's a Reshus HaRabim, a Srach and a Placher, both a Reshus HaRabim. Sorry, brief interruption. Someone asked a question here. Is not holding of an Eruv considered a Chumrah? No, not necessarily. If a person really holds like the class of Rishonim, like we saw yesterday in the Biur Halacha and Simon Shin Mem Hey, if a person really believes deep down that the rule of the parameter of defining a Reshus Harabim is that a Reshus Harabim doesn't have an issue of concentration of 600,000 Jews, that's not a Chumrah. That means that you hold it's mamish usser to carry in that place, even with an Eruv. Now, without an Eruv carrying in that space is an Isser Daraisa. With an Eruv, it drops it to a Darabana, but that would not be an example of a Chumrah. A Chumrah would be something like potentially Chalav Yisrael, or maybe Chadash Yashan. You got to get it. That Chadash Yashan might be more of a halachic problem than a Chumrah. But Chumrah, I only eat certain hashkachas. Those kinds of things. I only eat home cooked food. I won't eat restaurant. I won't eat any restaurant food. Those kinds of things are more in the realm of Chumrah. But the question that you're asking is, If a person says, I want to be machmer on the Eruv, b'derech klal, those people are not saying, I'm machmer. They're saying, I think it's usher to carry. They're not. It's usually b'derech klal, that's not considered a chumrah. Anyways, what's on each side of the mavui? So the first part of Rabbi Yehuda Marav is Sratya and Platya. These are both areas that are Rishus HaRabim. Aval, however, Sratya Mikan, if on one side you have Rishus HaRabim, Ubika Mikan, and you have a Carmelis on the other side, that's different. Oh, Bika Mikan, or if both ends of the Mavui are a Bika, a rabbinic space, not a Doraisa, not Rishus HaRabim, then we don't need this whole conversation we had yesterday. Rather, we're more lenient than we would be as it relates to the Shita of Chananya. We're more lenient than that. So says the Gemara, I don't understand the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Hashta, you taught me a very strange din. You taught me that Sracha Mikan Ubika Mikan, that if on one side I have a Rishus HaRabim, if on one side of the Mavui I have a Rishus HaRabim, and on the other side I had a Bika, you said that's a lightweight case. So then I don't understand. What did we say? The din was Mikan. But if you taught me that case already, so then Bika Mikan Mibaya, if on one side of my Mavui I have a Doraisa and on the other a Derabanan, and you told me that that's not a big deal. So then if they're both Derabanan on each end, then of course that's not a big deal. So why did Rav, teacher of Yehuda, the cases of both Sratya on one end of a Mavui and Bika, Doraisa space on one end of the Mavui and Derabanan, and then why did he need to teach me the second case where both ends of the Mavui are Derabanan? That's Pasha, that's a Kal V'chomer. I don't understand. Why would I need that? And that's what the Gemara is asking here. Bika Mikanu, Bika Mikan Mibaya. We're 5 lines from the bottom. Answers the Gemara. What was Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav? What was Rav teaching him? Answers the Gemara. Hachi Kamar. Sracha Mikanu, Bika Mikan. When on one end of a mavu you have a sracha, which is doraisa, and on another end of the mavu you have a bika, it's simply nase ki bika mikanu bika mikan. It's not teaching you a new case. We need to say that it's equivalent to that very lenient case where at each end of the mavui you have a space that's derabanan. And that's all that the Gemara was trying to teach. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Marav continues, or I should say, Rabbi Yosef, quoting Rabbi Yehuda, quotes as follows, and he says, "Umesayim ba mishmid Rabbi Yehuda." Rabbi Yosef finishes quoting Rabbi Yehuda in the following way. What does he say? Im haya mavui kala l'rechava ein tzarich klum. Let's say you have on one side a Rishus HaRabim, and then you have a Rishus HaRabim. Let's say I'm the Rishus HaRabim. Then you have a mavui going toward you, and you are not a Rishus HaRabim, you're just this wide open space, a nothing, a zero. Nobody lives there, it's just empty space. It's not a mavui, it's not a bika, it's a zero. So then what do we do in that case? Says the Gemara, ein tzarich klum. On the side of the Rishus HaRabim, you have to do something, but on the side of the Rechava, you don't have to do anything. In my Gemara, I have a picture here where Rashi highlights, I don't know if you can give me a thumbs up if you see this in your Rashis, but I have a drawing here in Rashi at the bottom of Daf Zayin and Aleph where it indicates what's going on. I'll try to show this in a little bit here so you can see the case here. What you have is Rishus HaRabim, then you have a Mavui, then it goes into an open space called a Rechava, and then you have another Rishus HaRabim. So the din that the Gemara says is Ein Tzarech Klum, meaning over here I need to do something, but over here I don't need to do anything. By the Rechava, I don't need to do anything. That's what the Gemara is saying. It's Ein Tzarech Klum. So it says the Gemara, this statement, was it Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav or Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel? Now I know we started out talking about Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, but it says the Gemara as follows. Amar le Abai le Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef, when you just quoted this sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, who were you quoting in the name of? I'm confused. Had the Rabbi Yehuda, it has to be the Shmuel here. It can't be Rav. It has to be the sheet of Shmuel. Why? Turning to the top of Daf Zayin Amud Beis, a short Amud. Let's continue. The Rav, if it were to be the case that this was actually the Shita of Rav, voice crack there just for entertainment, sorry about that. If we have this case where you just quoted by the Rechava, where at the end of one Mavui it's this open space, if you say that it's Rav, the Rav, Kasha de Rava de Rabitarte, this makes it doubly difficult for Rav. How so? Because the Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rav, we have a statement from Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rav as follows: Mavui shenifrat b'miluo lechatzer. If you have a mavui and the wall of the mavui is the length of the wall of the mavui typically is up against a chatzer. If that wall totally breaks down, b'nifrat chatzer kenegdo, and it's totally open, so then what does Rav say? Chatzer muteres umavui aser. Rav says that the chatzer is mutter to carry and the mavui is aser. Asks the Gemara, but if the line that you taught me on the bottom, the case of mavui kala l'rechava, if you said the Ein Tzarech Klum on the bottom of the page, it can't be Rav, because Rav says this case over here that that Chatzar Muteris and Mavui Asher. Ve'amai, fourth line. Lehabe kemavui shekala l'rachava. It should have easily been explained that, like the case that we saw on the bottom of the previous page of Mavui Kala l'rachava. So therefore, as says the Gemara, it can't be that it was in the name of Rav. It has to be that it was Shmuel. Answers the Gemara. Rav Yosef says back to Abai, Amar Le, Analo Yadana. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know who I learned it from, but I do know the following. Uvda, this is Rav Yosef talking. Rav Yosef says, I don't know where Rav Yehuda heard it from Rav or Shmuel. Why? Says the Gemara as follows. Uvda hava bedur de Ra'avasa. There was a location where there were a lot of shepherds, and this is the story that took place. There was a case of Mavui Shekala l'Rachava Hava. There was that case, like the picture on the bottom of Zayin and Beis and Rashi. But also the comment to Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda was there, velo atzrechei velo midi, and he didn't make anyone make any changes. Namely, that seemingly like the Gemara concluded on the bottom of the previous page, the Ikashi Mishmei de Rav. And had it been that it was in the name of Rav, this is what Rav Yosef is saying. If it doesn't make sense that it fits within the name of Rav, fine. I don't know what to tell you, says Rav Yosef. If it doesn't work for Rav, it must be that this last statement that I quoted about the Mavui, that's Kala the Rachava, it must be that that's in the name of Shmuel. Okay. And then the Gemara just ends up quickly, just to the bottom of the page, and then we'll pause for the night. Says the Gemara, Hashda da Amar le Rav Sheshes the Rav Shmuel bar Abba. There was a statement that was made by Rav Sheshes to Rav Shmuel bar Abba. Ve'amrela, some say it was made to Rav Yosef bar Abba. Azber Allah, I could explain all of this so that there's no machlokes at all. You're trying to figure out, how does the Mavui Kala l'Rachava work? Is it machlokes Rav and Shmuel? Says the Gemara, it's not a machlokes at all, because Kanshi Irbu, Kanshi Lo Irbu, depends if there's an Eruv. And as well, in regards to the machlokes that we saw by Rav at the top of the page, from the case of Mavui Kala l'Rachava on the bottom of Zayin and Beis, so this case on the top of Mavui Shenifratz Bimiluo, there too we can answer. The Rav Nami Lo Kasha, no problem at all. In that case where the wall fell down between the Mavui and the Chatzar, in one case there was an Eruv, in Kanshlo Eruv, in another case there wasn't an Eruv. So there's no contradictions at all. Everybody agrees with everybody. And the Gemara's conclusion is very simple. What is that? That when there is an Eruv, either in the case of the Mavui Shenifratz Bimiluo, or in the case of the Mavui Shenifratz Berachava, when there's an Eruv, you're good. And when there's not an Eruv, you're not. And by the Sira of Rav, in that case as well, when there's an Eruv, it's mutter. And when there is no Eruv, it is not mutter. We're going to stop here for the night. We'll pick up in Mir Hashem tomorrow night on the top of Daf Ches Amud Aleph at the very first word, Ulamai. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Thank you so much for learning. Good night.